Good morning, SCU 541 students. So this is a quick video to accompany the PowerPoint slide that I provided for you for guidelines on writing the policy analysis section for the course. So just to begin with, educational researchers, write policy analysis so that they can examine a specific issue within an educational context at a particular moment in time, right? And so the ultimate goal of a policy analysis is to lead to some kind of change by raising an awareness about how this particular policy, has contributed to a problem for a specific population of people. The policy may not impact all students in a school context, or all teachers in a school context, or all parents, or administrative staff, or other staff. And even among these group of people, we may want to narrow that category down even further. So, how might questions to think about include: how might the policy be impacting a subgroup, a population within the larger student body population, for example? So a policy analysis typically includes three parts. First of all, that it identifies the key policy issues. For this assignment, a policy can be curriculum, it can be a discipline policy. You might have another type of policy that you have in mind that maybe you want to check to make sure if that's acceptable, and I'm happy to do that. But what I've heard so far is that people are working on either curriculum or student discipline policies, because remember, for this project, for this course, you are ultimately creating an improvement plan that is grounded in the classroom. So it's leading towards school improvement, but it will begin with professional development that will then should impact change in terms of teacher practice, which then should lead to better outcomes for the students that are served in your school. And it could be a particular subgroup, of students that are served in your school. So, taking a step back, you want to identify the policy issues specifically that are going to be relevant when you look at next your school resources, and then ultimately devising your improvement plan. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the course, we are working backwards from our larger goal. So you want to make sure that this aligns. And as I read your school context reports, I see that folks have sort of neatly focused a SMART goal. So this analysis should sort of transition you right into looking at the existing policy in your school relative to how you're envisioning your school improvement. So a policy analysis always includes current research. So you have the policy in and of itself as a document, but then what does the existing research say about these issues that you have identified in the policy? So in this assignment, you are going to need to look at the resources that I have provided for you in the course introduction module, or you'll be looking at the resources that have been provided for you in the weekly module, so the module for this education policy analysis. And I'm pretty certain that you'll be drawing from additional research that you have taken from a prior course, that you've read from a prior course, or that you need to read. So again, that organization, ASCD, is a great resource for research articles that are like sort of get straight to the point and that are very, very accessible. So I highly encourage you to go to that website. I actually became a member the other day, because I didn't have a membership. And I wanted to, you'll notice that the Educational Leadership Journal is included, I believe, it's either in this module or next week's module. So I wanted the full issue for you all. So I became a member, and I think it was $30. So most articles you'll have access to for free. Sometimes to get full access or for a digital book, you'll need a membership, but the membership is pretty cheap. So ASCD is the organization that you can get research from. I also highly recommend that folks read the Milner article that I've provided, because that can be another source to help you engage in your analysis, because there's some curriculum that is explicit. That would be your written document. There's some curriculum that is implicit. That would be based on your observations, right? Or what you hear from students or what you hear from your colleagues. And there's some curriculum that is completely missing, that is a gap, right? There's some policies that don't exist, but that need to exist. So Milner will help you, that article will help you in that analysis. And then finally, you have the Rohrback Library. You have access to tons of journal articles as well. So I am not putting a number on the amount of research or sources that you need to cite, excuse me. However, you have to make sure that your discussion of those issues is grounded in current research. So it seems to be the case that at least 3 sources will be beneficial, and potentially that looks like 1 from the course or another course and 2 from ASCD. That could be one way to approach this. And then finally, for a policy analysis, you're examining how these issues and the research can lead to a design of a solution, which is ultimately what you'll be working on. So if you've identified the issue within the policy and the research also affirms that this is an issue in school context, then your writing needs to make the connection so that you can transition to your analysis of the school resources, which is the next piece that you're writing, and then ultimately your school improvement professional development plan. So who are you writing a policy analysis for? So always for your audience, and this is for even for you as you some of you revise your school context reports. Your audience is for a community of educational stakeholders that includes students, teachers, parents, administrators, community members, policymakers, educational researchers. So it can include people who understand the nomenclature in education, the jargon that we use, or people who are completely unfamiliar. It can include people who live in your school district or people who don't even live in your state, so who have no idea what you mean when you say Kutztown. Like, well, what does that mean in the context of Pennsylvania? Where is it located, right? So going back to your school context report for a minute, you have to assume that your audience is a brand new group of people that you do not know, and you have to break it down and explain everything to them. So when you engage in your policy analysis, your job is to increase awareness about this particular issue and get those folks involved. How can you convince them to care about the issue that you've identified? So your analysis should, again, raise awareness. You could be drawing support for a particular analysis, for a particular policy, because you want to strengthen that policy. And you might want to strengthen that policy in terms of its use. Maybe a policy exists that's really strong, but it's not being utilized in your school district. So it's in paper, but it's not in practice. So that could be another point that you want to encourage stakeholders to call attention to for stakeholders. And lastly, you need people to collaborate with you. Remember, as a school leader, you're not building a vision. by yourself ultimately, right? You're working with other colleagues. So, how can you convince stakeholders that are in that are in your school context potentially to rally around this and work alongside you? Because your audience is inclusive of all the stakeholders that I've already mentioned, it really needs to be written in a very accessible and relevant way. And this also goes back to your school context report and also going forward to your analysis of data. Do not assume, starting off in your first sentence, that your audience knows anything that you're talking about. So you have to spell it out, and it always helps to be compelling and engaging. This isn't a formally written paper, and people care about stories. They care about the narrative of a school. They care about a narrative of a teacher who's trying to make improvement in a school. So those are parts that you can be very explicit in, because again, you're trying to convince others to believe in your policy analysis. So your sections should be very easy. This isn't an essay. It should be easy to read, section headers, very visible points. You should have a practical tone of voice. You're not blaming students for these issues, right? It's our job to help students. You're not blaming teachers for not necessarily following the policy or not having fidelity to the policy. You're documenting a phenomena relative to the existing policy. So you have to formulate this in such a way that you're very careful not to engage in the blame game. Now, here's one thing that I'll share with you, and let me back up for a second. So just in sum, that your writing should be very concise, very well organized. It should be logical, and it has to be supported by the research. You have to come from a well-informed standpoint so that people can believe you, right? These stakeholders. One of the things that's a little bit tricky, or that you should be aware of, is that you're writing a policy analysis in the context of working in your own school district, right? So you can't dismantle the master's house. You live in it. So you have to be very, very tentative in your discourse so that you're not engaging in deficit talk about students or about parents or about teachers or what the school leaders don't do, because you have to live in that house. You will see other policy analyses that look different from what I'm asking you for in this course. So I'm kind of just having you dabble in the first parts of a policy analysis. But typically, a full educational policy analysis goes a bit harder, right? It actually, and that's because those people that are writing the analysis aren't necessarily living and working in that context, right? So I've written a policy analysis about improving teacher preparation, urban teacher preparation, and it's posted here on D2L. But I wasn't teaching in an urban school, and I wasn't talking about my own program to improve. It was something that I envisioned, right? So I went a bit harder. And also included in the one that I'll show you was that I came up with a solution, right? A proposed solution. You're not doing that part, because your proposed solution is going to be in your professional development plan, your school improvement plan. That's the solution, is grounded in the classroom, grounded in the support of teachers. So you're really sort of dancing in this fine line between noticing how these policy gaps create a disservice, an injustice in the lives of students by no fault of their own, and assuming the best intentions by the adults in the context. And your idea that you'll be proposing in a couple of weeks is one possibility for resolving this. Again, with the best intentions in mind. So, what does the format look like? Well, I shared the format. Again, it's pretty straightforward. It's on D2L. In the PowerPoint, you need a cover page. Make sure that your title is a catchy title. Like, your title should say more than just policy analysis. What policy are you analyzing? Make it a title that I want to pick it up and read it, your analysis. You're going to have an introduction section, and the purpose of that section is to provide the reader with background information. So there's a set of questions. My suggestion is you go through and answer those questions. Like, you can make that very, very clear. It's not written in an essay format. So you can use that section header, introduction and background of the issue, and then explain in paragraph format your responses to those questions. And you'll notice that your responses are going to rely upon your school context report to some extent, which you've already written, and it's going to rely on the principles. Your principles should be embedded in this analysis. Your principles are your voice. We also call that your epistemological framework, your stance. You worked on your principles already, so these are going to come up and be applied in this analysis. Then you will have the statement of the problem, and the purpose of that is to analyze at least 3 specific issues that are related to the policy and the consequences if the policy persists as it exists right now. So if nothing's done, what's going to happen? So what are 3 issues that it causes? And what will happen if it persists? So again, you have 5 questions here that you can respond to, and fully responding to those answers can have can create a substantive statement of problem. And your final section, final 2 sections, is the alternative to current policy. So here you're coming back to the research. So the purpose of this section is to analyze how other school policies or programs have dealt with this same problem. There's nothing new under the sun, right, as a cliche. So there are other schools, there are other contexts, there are researchers who have addressed this problem. So what did they do? So you need to go find 3 examples that are alternatives to your existing policy. So if it's something embedded in school discipline, like the overrepresentation of students with disabilities in school discipline settings, well, what does the research say about how to change that at the classroom level? What practices do teachers need to know how to do to be a nexus for school change? For example, if it's a curriculum issue, and many of you talked about writing curriculum, that the students, there's a gap, there's a misunderstanding, achievement gap that Marshall talks about, or opportunity gap that Ladson-Billings writes about for a particular subgroup of students. Well, what have other schools done, to address this in their curricular redesign and their redesign of curricular policy to support a particular subgroup of students? And so here again, there's 5 questions that you can answer here, very clearly stated, that can lead to a substantive section, and I would keep that section header just as I presented it to you on the PowerPoint. And then finally, your conclusion. Your conclusion is like your final appeal to convince the stakeholders that the existing policy is flawed and that there needs to be a plan to improve teaching and learning. So think about this right quick, right? Policy, the stakeholders that could be, reading your policy analysis could include people who have power to make decisions, and power to make decisions that are funded. And ultimately, that's what you'll be looking at next module, right, is the resources in your school. Sometimes it's about an underfunded, under-resourced circumstances that creates these gaps in policy or flaws in policy. So this is where you're making your appeal. This is why we need to put this plan in place. And here's the obstacles. This is the last section for your conclusion. What are the most significant obstacles to implementing a plan? That should be your transition to your school resource section, or your school resource account, excuse me. Because you should be laying out what are the human, what are the fiscal, what are the technological challenges, obstacles that need to be addressed to improve the policy for the benefit of the students, right? To support student learning outcomes, because that is our goal here. So this this video is, again, providing you some further details about how to create this policy analysis document. The last thing is that you should include as an appendix the actual policy. So I want to see what the curriculum that you're speaking to. It needs to be attached as an appendix, up to 10 pages. It's digital, so we're not wasting paper. Or you can include a link, a hyperlink. After the appendix is your reference page. Be sure, folks, that we use the APA format. So if you need support with APA, the Rohrabaugh Library website has some guidelines, like right on the front page, for using APA for in-text and for your reference page. But I still use the OWL Purdue website because I just like it whenever I forget some things about APA. So that came up in the school context report. So make sure that you are correcting that here. Social sciences and your educational leaders, we use APA format to make sure that we cite our sources, and then that we cite them properly, so that I should be able to go find those sources, or any stakeholder should be able to find those sources. So I believe that's all. I hope this is helpful as you craft this policy analysis, and I will see you a bit later on today if you're going to be joining us for the optional Zoom with Principal Chambers. Take care.